So we're here to talk through this Regional Masyu by Prasanna. It has a challenging deduction to figure out the total number of turns, but to get started we really just need to mark standard Masyu deductions into the grid to get a sense of what that constraint will look like. So all I'm doing here is extending black cells that need to move out when I'm getting cases where the whites have just an option to go straight, filling those in. Get things like the forced turn after 4 in a row. Here the whites get forced after extending the black. We get this coming here, down and across. These come together. Straight through a white needs to turn. Straight through a white needs to turn, but if one direction would close off the loop. I think that's most of the 4 steps early on in the puzzle. We now have a few regions which give us boundaries on the turn count. Either of these are good spaces to do it. These regions have 2 turns right now. They have 1 empty cell which could potentially have a 3rd turn. So we know that n will be 2 or 3. That will tell us the center cell isn't used as a region or visited as a region in this puzzle. The next step before we can really deduce which of 2 or 3 it is a Masyu pattern that's not very common, but if you look ahead a little bit, whichever direction this black cell goes, to the left or to the right, it's going to force the open end above it to connect across. So if it were here, this end has to come left. If it were here, this end has to come right. So regardless of how the black turns, this line segment on the boundary has to continue as so. This now really makes this 3rd cell in this corner region quite hard to get to. You might be able to visualize this, but because the turn is going to put these ends right next to each other, there's your 1 turn in this cell. You would need to have these remaining 2 cells also turn to get to 3 total. But what we've done is stranded a white cell here. If we actually look at this slightly differently, this has to come across, white has to come across. We get a case like this. This region has 1 turn compared to regions that have 3 turns. The isolation of this cell in the corner was the way I got to seeing that n is exactly 2 in this puzzle, and that lets us now go through the distinct regions, count up the turns we see, and make sure we always get up to 2. This region, for instance, needs a turn right here. This region has 1 so far. This region in the corner has 2. Once we have a region already has 2 turns, just extend its furthest section. This region has a turn. If this cell turned down, it would also have to turn right, which would introduce too many turns. So that is how this area goes. Having closed this off, we can force this white cell to come down. These ends will have to connect. We're not sure exactly how yet, but the black's going to go to the right. What we have to be thoughtful of is how do we get enough turns in this area but not too many turns. You should recognize something that's set up here with these 2 free ends is there's at least 1 but potentially 2 turns from these ends. There's no way if this extends straight it's going to put a turn here. If it turns it's going to put a turn there. So there's at least 1 turn up here. What that means is if this end comes up and over to add 2 more turns, it's adding too many. So you can't visit this cell. This is how the loop goes. This is turn 1. This needs a 2nd turn, which is turn 2. That now forces this black end to go this way. This is 1, 2 turns here, so this cell continues straight. We have a situation in the bottom here where we can do some end counting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ends. The 8th end has to come from the black cell to enter this region, or we just won't have enough to fill it out. We need to make sure that we have 1, 2 ends there, 1, 2 turns here. These 2 loop ends can't come together, they'll close off a loop, so we need to have an end reaching in, this end coming across. Right now there's 1 turn in this region, so this longer way is going to get too many. It's going to be this. It's now finished off the bottom pretty well. The next thing to observe, we already have a region on the left side here that has 2 turns in it. So no more loop segments can be on its boundary on the left side. Would get too many turns in total. This region already has 2 turns, so it's going to come straight. This cell is going to turn left or right. Yes, I can mark. It's a little hard to see. I'll mark with X as that. This means that this cell can't take a jot to the left. If it took a jot to the left, it would add 2 new turns. If it took a jot to the right, it would add 2 new turns. So it's actually forced to continue straight. It can no longer visit this cell. So the cell that has the second turn in this region is right here, 1 and 2. That now tells us this is the connection there. This region now has 2 turns. This end needs to connect to something, so it's going to connect over here. Because this region can't have another turn and we need to get 2 total, that's closing off here. This cell is going to come to the right to get its turn. Look like this, 1, 2. Good in that space. This air region has 1, 2 turns, which is good. These ends just have to come together, and that actually finishes off this puzzle. It's not necessarily challenging to solve after you get through this large hurdle of knowing how many turns are there. You might have found how to do that by bifurcation or just testing, as we did in this region, what would happen. What's really nice in this variation, though, is that after you have that constraint, there's lots of uses of the different regions where you can think of how the path will fill out and think of how a certain number of turns, for instance, we saw 1 turn had to be in these cells, limited what we could do elsewhere. And so I like this variation a lot. It's great that a patron requested us to make more of it. We'll see if we have more in the future. We'll see you again soon.